trouble seeing at night, and I have trouble remembering. But I saw everything that night because the moon was full, and I remember everything as though a film were playing over and over in my mind. On that night, I was running through the bushes at the far end of the cemetery. The mist covered the ground like a shroud, and the tombstones stuck up through it looked like a garden of stone. I was running as fast as I could. Someone or something was chasing me. I was panicked. My shoulder throbbed and bled at each step from the gash the thing had made in it. It had felt like a knife, but it could have been a claw. The bushes ripped at my legs like talons. I could hardly breathe. My tongue lolled out of my mouth. The thing behind me was making inhuman sounds and was getting closer. And then I tripped on a small grave marker beneath the mist and fell. And when I hit the ground, the black pillow of unconsciousness smothered my brain, and I felt nothing. This was just a small village in Yugoslavia. It was springtime, and I'd been walking through the Ural Mountains, and had decided to go down to the village for some hot food and a soft bed. The people were friendly, even though I was a stranger. But when I left the small cafe that night and was standing out in front looking up at the full moon, this thing came out of nowhere and slashed me across the shoulder. I started running for my life. I didn't even turn around to look and see who it was. When I finally came to there in the cemetery, my head hurt across the forehead. There was no sound. I sat up and looked around at the silhouettes of shapes in the moonlight. The tombstones, the angels, the trees blowing in the wind. Then suddenly I saw one of the shapes move. And I realized I was looking at a man with his back toward me. He wore the robes of a priest, and in one hand he held an axe. He was peering into the darkness looking for me. There was a high wall behind me that I couldn't get over, and I realized that the only way out of this was to sneak by him. I got down on my hands and knees and began crawling forward. He couldn't hear anything because the leaves were blowing in the wind. Just when I thought I had gotten by him, I put my hand down on something soft and warm, and a meadowlark screeched and flew up into the air. He turned and looked directly at me. Without even thinking, I lunged at him, swung my hand at his face. For a second, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I had just scooped out part of his face. He stared at me for an instant, then fell backward and hit the ground like a tree that's been cut off at the roots. I looked down at him. The lower half of his face and part of his neck were gone. He was a priest, and he still held the axe in one hand. I felt ill, and I staggered through the cemetery down to the other end, where there was a small chapel. A small light was coming out of one of the windows. I opened the doors and looked in. There were 2 candles down at the other end on the altar, and a woman kneeling in front of them. I tiptoed up the aisle to her because I didn't want to disturb her, but I had to talk to someone. I tapped her on the shoulder. She turned around. It was the pretty waitress from the cafe. Only now she wasn't so pretty. Her eyes were protruding, and her face was ashen. Her lower jaw was quivering as though she were freezing cold. She was trying to say something. Finally, she rasped out, "What are you doing here?" I looked at her distorted face, then opened my mouth and said, I love the Ural Mountains in the springtime. The sun is bright and warm. The sky is clear. The new flowers are coming up, and the little streams are over-flooding with the melting snow. Down below, I see a single plume of smoke spiraling up, and it disappears into the winds that blow around the tops of the peaks. I decide to go down to the little village for a hot meal and a soft bed. I haven't seen anyone in a month. I think there's a full moon tonight.